Well, today, on this Sunday, we are continuing our Easter series where we are looking at the way that we bless one another, how we can be blessed and how then we can in turn bless others. And today's gospel lesson is one of those moments in Jesus' teachings where he can be just a little obtuse. You know, he says something good and poetic, but it's kind of like, then what is he really talking about? Today, we hear about vines and branches, and I want to kind of keep it simple. Vines and branches are something that we probably all can understand. Like, regardless of how much gardening training we have really had, we all understand what a vine looks like. We can kind of picture the way that vines kind of meander around and twist and turn. But Jesus speaks not only of the vine and the branches, but also of the pruning and the way that pruning really works. Now, because of my extensive gardening experience, I had to Google what really pruning a vine does. And it turns out that in the right hands, a vine can grow very intentionally and be super healthy, but in the wrong hands, if there is no pruning done, then vines will often twist in on itself and begin to, in a sense, block the light that itself needs. And so it will not be as healthy as it can be. And so this idea of vines and branches and the pruning is really meant to help that vine be as healthy as possible. In fact, the word that is translated as pruning can also mean things like cleanse or made pure. And so really what Jesus is getting at is this idea that we grow over time, that in our lives we grow and we develop, and if we are pruned properly, if we are kind of made pure and cleansed regularly, then how we grow will be very intentional. And when we grow, we will be so much healthier than we would have been without all of the pruning along the way. Now, that pruning is not exactly the part of the growth that we love, because the pruning means that we are guided in certain ways. And that's where Jesus gets to this idea of abiding in God. That abiding in God idea is really central to our discipleship identity, really central when we speak of how we are blessed and then how we can bless others. If we think about what we do in the world, how we behave and how we treat others, it would be very easy to say that how we behave, what we do in the world, can be done whether we are rooted in God or not. I mean, think about if you do something nice or considerate or generous, whether you're rooted in God's identity or you're just doing something nice, the effect of the doing might actually be similar. So the receiver, that person who may feel the blessing of whatever you do, might, in a sense, be the same. But the motivation of why we do what we do, and in fact, when we root ourselves in God, the regular way in which we are motivated shifts radically. When we are rooted in God, when we are abiding in God's love, who we are becoming shifts in really powerful ways. How we act, the frequency with our actions, the purpose of our actions all shift over time to help not only the recipient benefit from the blessing, but us as the doer, as the giver, benefits in real powerful ways. That does not happen on our own. That doesn't happen with just wishful thinking. That happens when we are in community and when we lean on one another and when we help one another to actually grow in the best way. And we see that in our reading from Acts. This reading from Acts is so great, one of my favorites, where Philip, as one of the early disciples going out and spreading the good news, finds himself next to a caravan of an Ethiopian eunuch. Now, just put ourselves in the context of Acts. Jesus has come, and he died, and he was resurrected, and he appeared to some of the disciples, and then he ascended. And so now this group of followers are left to build the kingdom without Jesus physically being there. And they're doing their best, and they're bumping around, and they're telling people stories, and they're making some mistakes and all that good stuff. But Philip leaves, and he's walking around, And he runs into this Ethiopian eunuch. And what's important about this story is that this Ethiopian eunuch is a powerful person. He has come as an emissary from the very, very powerful nation of Ethiopia to essentially deal with, diplomatically and economically, the nation of Israel. That's important to know because this eunuch is extremely well educated. This eunuch knows a lot, is worldly, is well-traveled, is obviously very literate. And as he's traveling along, he's reading this prophetic word from the Israelites, from the Jewish people. And Philip hears this, and he goes up to the eunuch, and he says, "Do you know what you're reading?" It's a fascinating question, because we often think, if you can read, then you know. But what Acts does is it turns that a little bit. The eunuch was able to read, yes. But did the eunuch actually understand? And then in his humility, the eunuch says, no one's here to teach me or to help me understand. And so Philip saddles up next to him and begins to tell him the story of Jesus. And the eunuch's eyes are opened so powerfully that he wishes to be one of those followers. He wishes to change his life and to redirect his life in this very powerful way. The eunuch may have read all of those words, but until someone came beside him to help him understand, his life was not changed. And that's the power of church. That's the power of what we do together. Yeah, we can all read these words. Anyone can read the Bible. But how does it actually impact who we are and what we do and how we live and where we abide? That is what church actually helps us do. That's what we do for each other. And it is radically important that we understand the power and the responsibility that we have to one another. Not only for ourselves to be humble enough to learn, but to be the person who has the strength inside to also teach. That both and is very important. And the power of being part of a church is one that can surprise you sometimes when we least expect it. Now, this might all sound quite grand, but it's actually a little simple when we apply this to our daily lives. Last week, a parishioner sent me a story about something that she had done, super simple, but had left a real impression on her. And with her permission, I will share her story. So she writes to me, and I'll say this from her perspective, that a few weeks ago, I had a life-changing experience, and I need to share it with you. It was a Friday afternoon around 3:30, and I was at Sonic during happy hour, because you get half-price drinks at Sonic during happy hour, and I ordered a Diet Coke. And in the meantime, I was talking with my daughter on the phone, and I was in a hurry because I wanted to get to my daughter's house because I was watching over my teenage grandson for the weekend. Well, Sonic was very busy, and people were rushing around, and I was waiting. And I waited a long time for my drink, and I was getting a little agitated. And so I punched the button again, and I ordered again. And a young man who was obviously rushing between all the different cars came out to give me my drink. And I said, well, I have been waiting a long time, but thank you for finally bringing my drink. And my daughter on the phone said, Mom, don't be rude. He's doing the best he can. I gave him a little tip and I drove on, but of course that was not the end of the story because I got home and my grandson was fine and we talked about his day, and after a very good visit, I was getting ready for bed and I could not get this young man from Sonic out of my head. I'd been rude to him in the afternoon and it just was sticking with me. I had seen this young man rushing around with all the customers' orders and I could not get that incident out of my mind, but what was I supposed to do? God was definitely trying to talk to me, and I was trying to listen, and finally it snapped, and I remembered a sermon I had heard at St. Michael, just try. The idea of just try something. And so that sermon began to encourage me, and I was hung up on not being perfect, but I decided I was just going to try to make things better. And so after church that Sunday, I drove back to Sonic, I got out of my car, I knocked on the little door, and luckily the same man was inside. Now I motioned for him to come out, and he was understandably confused. And I said, last Friday, I was rude to you, and I was wrong, and I'm sorry. And he replied, that's okay. And I said, no, it's not. I'm sorry, and I want you not only to forgive me, but realize that when customers are rude, It's just because it's easy to lash out at you, and it's not okay. So I handed him $10, a much better tip than I had given him the first time, and said this was the least I could do for him. And then for no apparent reason at all, I asked him his name, and he answered, Gabriel. And she said, and I got the message. What I love about that story is many, many things. When we do and go about in the world, we can make little mistakes. They're not tragedies, but it's one little mistake after another, and they can kind of weigh on us. And here she was, weighed down by this little mistake, this little rudeness. But as she was trying to figure out what to do, it was this community. It was this kind of experience, it's little nuggets of sermons and teachings and conversations in the hallways that helped her have the courage to go try to make it right. And in that moment, she was really abiding in God's love in that very tangible way. That's the invitation for all of us. It's the encouragement that we give one another to root ourselves in God's reality, in God's love and grace, and that no matter what happens in the world, no matter how big or how small, when we are faithful, when we live out God's love in very tangible ways, we can be transformed little by little, day by day, pruned, cleansed, and made healthier and healthier because we abide, we root ourselves in God's love. So I'll leave you with the question, what weight are you carrying? What weight are you carrying around? A relationship that needs to be repaired, wrong that needs to be righted. What small thing can you do today or this week to actually root yourself more deeply in God's love, to allow God to prune you up just a little bit more in the next few days so that all of us together can become healthier and healthier, more and more, as God created us to be. Amen.